pray that you would just lead and guide us every day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. The spirit of the law versus the letter. Spirit of the law versus the letter. First of all, a lot of people are probably wondering, well, what is the spirit of the law? Well, the spirit of the law basically is the reason or purpose of the law or of a specific law. Examples, there are laws that preserve life. There are laws that protect property and so on. You see that even in our governments. Our government makes laws for certain reasons, and God has made a lot of different laws for various reasons. And it's so, in other words, the spirit of the law is what you have to figure out, what is the reason behind the law. Now, the letter of the law is the actual word for word reading of the law. Okay? And the letter of the law does not take into account specific cases necessarily. Okay? So that is a big difference. So the letter of the law is how the law reads. The spirit of the law is what was the intent of the lawmaker in making that law. For instance, I'll just give just an example here. If the law says that if there is a speed limit sign that says you cannot exceed 55 miles an hour, and I have a severely injured person in my car that I've picked up off the road, they were, bleeding almost to death, and I got to get them to the hospital as fast as I can. And I decide, well, you know what? There's nobody on this deserted road. I'm going to go 75 miles an hour, 25 miles over the speed limit, to get them medical treatment so they don't die on the way there. Okay? So the question would be, would it be a righteous thing for a law enforcement officer to pull me over and give me a speeding ticket because I was going 20 miles over the speed limit? Or would it have been righteous for the law enforcement officer to say, okay, I see what's going on, get there, I'll help you, I'll escort you. Now, somebody who goes by the letter of the law would say, it's just tough. I mean, that's the law. The law is a law. It's a rule, and so on, without taking into account what was going on. The fact that there was nobody even on the road. My speed was not endangering anybody. In fact, the speed was actually intended to save somebody's life. All right? And all right. I guess my question would be, if I got a ticket, I want you guys to think about this. If I got a ticket for going 20 miles over the limit, would the police officer be following the spirit of the law? If you gave me a ticket for going 75 on a 55. Anybody? Should I get a speeding ticket for bringing a person bleeding to death to the hospital? All right. Well, obviously, the first step, in order to answer this correctly, you'd have to say, okay, what was that law made for? Obviously, the speed limit being 55 is to protect people, to keep the roads safe. And being that there was no one else on the road, the speed wasn't endangering anybody. And I'm not just speeding for my own convenience because I just want to get somewhere. I'm speeding because I'm trying to save a life. So in fact, if I was going 75 on a 55, carrying a bleeding person that could die at any minute, I'm actually following the spirit of the law, though I'm breaking the letter of the law. Okay? Because what was the law's purpose in the first place? To save lives. Okay? To make things safe. So, all right. Why do we bring this up? How does this apply in the biblical sense? Well, there were a group of people called the Pharisees, all right? They were really good at focusing on the letter of the law, both for two reasons. Number one, they knew the law very well so that they could follow the law outwardly so that other people would think, hey, I'm so that other people would think that they are a righteous person. Samson, could you please stop that? That's very distracting. Okay. So the Pharisees would understand the letter of the law so that they could justify themselves and so that they could entrap other people. Okay? Have you ever heard of lawyers today? What are lawyers really good at? The letter of the law. They know the loopholes. They know this and that. And oftentimes the spirit of the law is just thrown out the window because of these experts in how it is officially written. What does the code actually say, and how can we work our way around this and that and so on. And obviously the like I said, the Pharisees were experts in the law, but only the letter, not the spirit. So let's check that out. Matthew chapter 23, verse 1. And I do want to say this before we get into this. I have it in the description of the video. I'm sure many of you know people, or you work for a company where there is an employee there that's over and above you that is supposed to be your manager or whatnot. And it is their job to enforce the rules. And sometimes you get these people that I guess I would call them rule followers, okay? They're going to go by whatever the technical written rule says, no matter what the situation. All right. And they always go back to that, well, rules are rules. And that's what the policy states, even though it makes no sense in this specific situation to apply it. They're going to do it, and they're going to do it feeling as though they are righteous guardians of the policy. Okay. Rule followers. Now, they are people that have no sense of judgment or common sense oftentimes. Oftentimes they are people who are just trying to protect their own jobs, their own welfare, and not actually trying to administer any kind of righteous judgment or doing what is right for other people. And this, again, is what the Pharisees were guilty of. Matthew chapter 23, verse 1. We're going to read an example here where Jesus confronts these rule followers. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. What did he mean by that? Who were the scribes and Pharisees? Well, they were the religious leaders of his day. And what were they? What did they covet so much? The law. Okay? Not so much the spirit of the law, but the letter of the law. Like I said, the letter of the law, if you know it really well, you can use it to bring glory to yourself, or you can use it to entrap other people. And that's what the Pharisees, that's how they applied the law. And a lot of people get confused about this. Some people feel like Pharisees today, like the modern church, the lawless church, they will think that somebody is a Pharisee because they love God's law. They study his law and they want to obey it. They think, well, that's being a Pharisee. No, a Pharisee is someone who understands the letter of the law, and they're like a lawyer today, and they figure out how to use it to their advantage, to bring glory to themselves or to entrap their enemies or those who they are competing against. Okay? To say, I gotcha. Policy number 103.567 says this, and you violated it technically. Okay? Even though I know you didn't mean to do that type of a thing, right? So Jesus says the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. They love being looked upon as lawmakers, lawgivers, the authorities in charge. Verse 3, all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not after their works, for they say and do not. Okay? They were hypocrites. They would always tell people to do things that they would not do themselves, and it wasn't always easy to detect that outwardly, but it was happening inwardly. In other words, these scribes and Pharisees, they were really good at making sure they had all their bases covered according to the letter of the law, even though they were violating the spirit of the law. And we'll get into some specific examples here in a minute. Jesus actually will. right now. He says, "For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and they lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers." Now think about this. You see this in places of employment. You see this even in youth sports. I see it in youth sports even, where the people that make the rules keep making more and more rules that burden everybody, okay? That place burdens on the coaches, place burdens on the players. And it gets to the point where it's so technical, it's so impossible to keep up with that anybody could be in violation of anything almost at any time. And so these people that like to sit in a position of authority, sit in Moses' seat, they do so because they like to make rules, okay? They like to make rules. Now, I'm not a lawless Christian, right? I don't believe in, the law is not important and all these types of things. But I am against people who scrupulously try to make extra rules to safeguard other rules and things like that, okay? It's not, they feel like more rules are going to make things better when oftentimes they make things worse. And another thing you'll notice that when you're part of an organization that does that, they never eliminate rules. They never have anybody come in and say, okay, there are a lot of rules here. A lot of times people call it red tape in other, industries or whatnot. Very rarely does anybody ever come in and say, let's get rid of all these rules. Let's simplify this. Let's make people's lives easier. They don't do that. They like the rules. They're obsessed with them. These Pharisees were. Verse 5, but all their works they do. Now check this out. Why do they do all this? Why did these Pharisees study the law? Because they wanted to please God? No. Because they do them for to be seen of men. For they make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Now, phylacteries were like little portions of scripture, okay? It was basically like they were placing scriptures all over their body so everybody could see, a little tassel here with a Bible verse there and so on. And I got nothing wrong with that. I like Bible verses. I might have some t-shirts with Bible verses on them. But these are the people that they're wearing these things to make themselves look righteous and important. And they love the uppermost rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues. They want all the important positions of power. And greetings in the markets. They want everybody to come up to them and say, hey, how you doing? You're an awesome guy. And to be called of men, rabbi, rabbi, or master, master. Okay, that's what these people feed off of. These are these people that are these rule enforcers, so to speak. They follow the letter of the law. They don't care about the situation. They say, that's the policy, or those are the rules, sir, or something like that. Verse 8, but be ye not called rabbi or master, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. All right, so we shouldn't covet titles and positions of importance for the sake of feeling important. And call no man your father upon earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. And there's actually a whole denomination that does this. It's amazing that they can just do that and nobody in the denomination says, hey, wait a second. I mean, one of the most common things you hear in this denomination is father, to a man. And it's, or Mother Mary, okay? It's crazy. All right, that's not my intent here to get into that. But verse 10, neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. Okay? Now, someone with a servant's heart and a position of responsibility isn't going to be enforcing the letter of the law. Okay? They're going to look at the law and say, hey, what was the intent of this law? And then they would look at the case and say, did this person violate the intent of the lawmaker? Or is this just a technicality that they're caught under or trapped under? And then they would say, yeah, okay, they didn't intend to do this situation. For instance, going back to me, if I got pulled over going 75 on a 55 trying to save somebody's life, a good police officer would say, hey, I know that's the letter of the law, but he wasn't endangering anybody and he's trying to save a life. Therefore, he's not getting a speeding ticket. Damien, you never get anybody speeding tickets for that, did you? Damien he used to be a law enforcement officer, so. All right. Verse 16. Woe unto you, ye blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. All right. Now, Jesus is getting in and he's correcting these hypocrites. He says, these Pharisees, they didn't want people swearing they took great offense if somebody swore by the gold, but not more so than the temple. All right. In other words, they coveted the gold. They honored the gold that was in the temple more than the temple itself. Okay. You fools and blind, for whether is greater. Now I want you to pay attention to this, because when you're trying to understand and apply God's law or man's rules or laws, you got to understand the intent of the lawgiver and what is the greater violation, so to speak, or what is the greater thing that you're trying to protect. You fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold. All right. I'm going to talk about this really quick for a second. I was actually, speaking of law enforcement, I was reading while I was doing research for this topic, I was reading a blog post by I don't know if he was a former law enforcement officer. I think he was a former law enforcement officer and now works for like the law enforcement, what do you call that? Association or something like that. But anyways, this law enforcement officer had been in law enforcement for over 20 years. One of the things that he said that he was seeing that was really hurting the relationship between the police force and the people was policies. Were all the policies. He said that since everybody has cameras and everybody's recording everything, it's very hard for officers to make a judgment call on something, because they could lose their job or they could be prosecuted with a crime by trying to enforce the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. Okay. Now, there was a bunch of different examples he gave. I just trying to think of one example that popped out in my mind. For instance, if an officer saw a guy that was a homeless guy, for instance, if he saw a homeless guy sitting on the road, if he went over there and gave him a sandwich, he could be in trouble for violating policy, because technically, if that officer sees that homeless man there, he's supposed to bring him to the proper food shelter and things like that. That's just one example that popped out in my mind, but you guys can think of many other examples where somebody could solve a situation very quickly because they're the person on the ground and they, should have the ability to make a judgment call on something, to make a situation go smooth. But because they know that there's all these policies and all these rules that they could be violating, now they're like, gosh, if I try to help this, I know if I could do this, it would help this person. But if I do it, I could get put in the hot seat. And I don't want to do that. I got my kids to feed at home. I want to keep my job. So it's better for me just to stick to the cold, hard policy, even if it's not for the betterment of this particular situation. So, and that's hard. And these people aren't necessarily the rule followers, but they are people being pressured by the rule followers. And this could apply in many different industries, whether you work in the medical field. There might be things you could go and do and help a person, but you're going to get brought in before the Human Resources Department for violating policy 103B or 107D5 or something like that. And it's crazy. And so you see that even in corporate America, in our government, in law enforcement, there are so many rules now that everybody has to follow, and nobody is allowed to make a judgment call. And one of the things that they try to say, well, if you did it for them, you'd have to do it for everybody. That really bothers me. Okay? Sometimes that's true, right? If you do something for somebody, you have to do it for everybody. But there are situations where, well, if I did it for this person, it would be the right thing to do. And this person over here might complain and say, well, that's not fair. Why can't you do that for me? But his situation A is totally different from situation B. You know what I'm saying? So I don't like that argument necessarily that, well, policy is policy, or if we do it for you, we'll have to do it for them. I think it's better to explain, hey, we did it for him because this was his situation. Yours is different. We're not going to do it for you. Sorry. Okay? But don't make that one person suffer because you don't want to offend the other guy that doesn't need an exception to the policy. And that's oftentimes what happens all over the place. And Jesus calls it what? Jesus calls people that do these kinds of things, you fools and blind. Can you not see that you're focusing your attention on the wrong things? Okay? The Pharisees would get very offended if somebody blasphemed the gold of the temple when the temple was greater than the gold. All right. Next verse, I'll bring up another story here. I'll get one more verse ahead here. Anyways, and whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing. But whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. So Jesus is, again, he's saying that the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat as the rule makers, the rule enforcers, but they're not righteously applying God's law. Even though outwardly many people would say, well, yes, technically they're following the rules. Now, I have to be open and admit, one of the reasons why I'm doing this special study today, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, is because of, I think it was last Sunday, my son got a penalty playing youth hockey, a penalty that anybody in the stands or anybody at the game or anybody who reviewed the video after the game would have said, oh, that should have been maybe a 2-minute penalty, but what about the other guy? And it was more than, the referee gave him more than a 2-minute penalty. He gave him a game suspension plus having to wait for a hearing before he could be reinstated. And the penalty that the referee gave him was, he said that my son tried to kick a kid, which he didn't. He tried, he need him to try to get the kid off of him. But under the technical rules, from what I understand after doing a bunch of research on this, because my son lifted up his leg off of the ice, it was technically a kicking motion. But the intent of the rule is that if they don't want players picking up their foot and kicking their skate blade towards another player, for the obvious reason that skate blades are sharp and you could hurt somebody really bad. You could, cut their leg if you're going to cut them. But in my son's case, his skate blade never went forward from his knee. The skate blade was never even close to the kid's body in any way. So I guess what I'm saying is, by the letter of the law, the referee could make that call. He could make that call and say, well, he made a kicking motion. But then I would say, well, why? My response would be, if we could have a meeting with that ref, would be, okay, but was it obvious to you that he was trying to kick his skate blade at the kid with malicious intent. And then he would, say yes or no, whatever he believed. But anybody, like I said, anybody who has watched the video has said, no, that's not what happened. It was a knee. It was not a skate blade. But the rules, but then again, they'll go back to the rule says a kicking motion. Okay. I know I'm kind of talking around in circles, but like I said, you have to go to the intent of the rule maker. What is the purpose of the rule? And then make a good judgment call on that. And that wasn't done. So I thought, that kind of got me really thinking of different cases in the Bible where there were rule followers that would use technicalities to entrap people. Obviously, the Pharisees attempted to do this to Christ many times, and so on. Had my son kicked his leg at a kid with his skate blade sticking out, I would not defend my son. I would say, you deserve the punishment. The spirit of the law, the intention of that law is so you don't hurt somebody with your skate blade. You endangered somebody. But when his skate blade never even went towards that other player and it was just his knee, it should have simply been a 2-minute minor, not a game misconduct, plus having to have a hearing with a board of hockey officials to see when and if he can be reinstated into playing this season. I mean, so it just got me thinking yes, it's just a hockey game, somebody would say, but it is an example of how people can get so caught up in technicalities and rules and feel like they're doing the right thing by enforcing the rule, because if we don't enforce that rule, somebody else is going to break the rule. And if we make an example out of this guy, everybody's going to be scared. Okay. You don't make an example out of somebody who didn't actually violate the intent of the rule maker or makers. Okay. Anyways, did I say enough on that? All right. I know it felt like I was rambling a little bit on that, but verse 19, you fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar sweareth by it and by all things thereon. And whosoever shall swear by the temple sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone. So, in other words, what Jesus is saying here is, hey, these guys really, they were paying their tithes. They were giving their mint, their anise, and these were great things that they were doing, right? The Pharisees were paying their tithes, but they were guilty of violating the weightier matters of the law. What does that mean? What's more important than paying your tithes? Tithes. It's not that tithes are not part of the law, right? But what were the weightier matters? Judgment. What is judgment? Looking at a case-by-case situation, taking a case and applying the law to it in a righteous, fair manner. Okay? That's a judgment. Like I was talking about that referee. That referee made a poor judgment call on my son. My son never endangered the other player with his skate blade. Okay? And I forgot to mention this. I knew I forgot something. The whole penalty led up to this kid twice the size of my son cross-checking him, holding him up against the boards with his stick across my son's neck. And after being held there for a while is when my son finally had his hands tied up. He was getting cross-checked against the boards, took his knee, just to try to get the kid off of him, to separate him. And that was called, and he was called, he got a game misconduct plus being suspended until further notice. And the other kid, guess what? Guess what he got? Absolutely nothing. No penalty whatsoever. Yet the person that was more in danger of being injured was my son by the cross-check. What's weightier? What's more serious? I mean, if I did this take for instance, we take all the hockey gear off, right? And I take a baseball bat or a stick and I pin somebody up against the wall across their neck, and that person needs me to get away. Who put who in danger? Number one, the instigator, the guy who came with the stick. But what's gonna hurt? What's putting the person more in danger, the knee or the stick across the neck? The stick across the neck. And that's again, this isn't. I'm not doing this study to defend my son and try to get him out of something here. I'm using it as an example that this referee totally botched the judgment on this call. Okay, and my point to you guys is in your places of employment. If you're a manager, if you're somebody in charge, don't mess up judgment. Okay, don't be a ridiculous rule follower and pull out of your manual rule 703.2b and say technically he was guilty, even though it looked like the other guy was like maiming him, but the rules are the rules. His foot left the skate and made what looked like some kind of a kicking motion. Anyways, and that's what the Pharisees were guilty of. They would well, he's going to say it here in a second. You have to look at, and we need to do this in our daily lives. When we're studying God's law, when we're operating on a day-to-day basis, why does God make these laws for us? And are we righteous if we just check off our list of rules that we believe we're following for God? Is that enough? Well, we're going to find out it's not here in a little bit. Weightier matters. Now, that's really one thing that's interesting, because there are parts of the law that are more important than other parts of the law. Okay? It's not all just one thing. If you violate a technicality, we got you. God doesn't play those games. Ye blind guides, which, here it is. This is exactly what I was saying in a nutshell. Everything I have taught thus far can be summed up in this verse. You blind guides, you blind so-called rule followers, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Okay? Picture a person having this big camel coming at them, and they're worried about the gnat. Get that gnat. All of a sudden. I mean, now going back to my son as an example, because that's been on my heart and mind for a while, that referee totally ignored the camel and strained at the gnat when he saw, his foot left the ice. Out of here. All right. Does it sound like I'm mocking the referee? Perhaps I am, but I'm using him as an example because I've seen it so many other times in different ways. It's just, this time it caused me to want to do a Bible study on it, and that's why we're talking about it. Skipping on down to we're on verse 25 of Matthew 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. In other words, it looks to everybody else, it looks like they are following the letter of the law, but within they were so full of wickedness and evil thoughts. Verse 26, thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup. That's the spirit of the law, my friends. What's within us? Our hearts, our spirits. Okay, it's not what we're outwardly doing. It's what our intent is. Now, I'm not saying that our outward actions aren't a reflection of that, but We can deceive with our outward actions. We can make other people think we're righteous when our heart is wicked. That's the point. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Okay? Get to the heart and the spirit. Verse 27, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. So in other words, this is like a beautiful grave. The scribes and Pharisees were like beautiful graves, but within that, but there's a dead body inside that grave, right? It's not a pretty thing in the inside. If you open up a grave and look at the dead body, it looks pretty gross. And that's what Jesus was saying. They look like on the inside, though their outside looks good. 28, even so also outwardly you appear righteous unto men, but within you are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Think about how many times Jesus said woe unto these people that loved to make and follow the rules. He didn't have a lot of nice things to say about them. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous. Okay, you build their tombs and you go to their grave sites and pay, have everybody see you paying homage to them, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Oh, our sinful forefathers, they killed the prophets. Oh my gosh, we would have never done anything like that. Wherefore you be witnesses unto yourselves that you are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill you up then the measure of your fathers, ye serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you shall kill and crucify, and some of them you shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them city to city, from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barchias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. So what Jesus was saying is that he's saying, you people who love to sit in Moses' seat as the lawgivers, as the law enforcers, or as the, want to be seen as somebody who is someone who's totally devoted to the law of God. He says, you're just like your forefathers who killed the prophets using what? Oftentimes, probably. What did they use? I'm sure they used what? They found the law and they applied the law in an unjust manner. In other words, they understood the letter of the law, but they used it to entrap the prophets. Okay? They use it to entrap the prophets, just like they did Christ. And we're going to get a couple examples here in just a minute. But first, I want to go back to Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, and answer this question. Can you follow? Can you be somebody who follows the rules? Now, I want you kids to pay attention to this as well. Can you be someone who technically follows the rules, but is really violating the rules? Okay? For example, if I told one of you guys to go upstairs and work on your writing assignment in your room, okay? And I intended for you to do that until dinner time. You just knew that, right? It was obvious. And instead, so you went up there and you put your pen on the paper, wrote 2 letters on your piece of paper, and you said, and then grabbed a an iPhone or an iPad or something and spent the rest of the time doodling on that. Technically, did you do what I told you to do? Go work on your paper? You could say, well, Dad, I wrote 2 words on that paper, okay? Or I wrote 3 sentences. So I did technically work on it, but then I decided to move on to something else, right? I don't know if that's the best example, but people can say they did something and technically followed what you said, but it's not really what I meant, and you knew it. You knew that's not what I meant. You know what I'm saying? And you figured out a way out of it. Okay. You found a loophole. Verse 17. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Okay. Jesus didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets. He came to fulfill them. In fact, in verse 18, he says, verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Now, some would say, well, Pastor Ben, right there, that's the letter of the law. You're making it sound like the spirit of the law is greater than the letter of the law, yet Jesus just said not one jot or tittle shall pass from the law. Okay? Now, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the letter of the law. Okay? Jesus is saying that the law isn't going to change one bit. But when you're talking about letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, we're not talking about how the law is written or changing the way it's written. We're talking about how to correctly apply that law using judgment. Using judgment. Why do you think all throughout the Bible you had judges and you had trials and you had witnesses? Because there's always an element of judgment that somebody in a position of power will need to use when looking at the law. It's not always easy. It's not always easy to just say, well, this is what the law says, word for word, and this person violated. There's always movement. There's always something that's different from somebody else's situation. Does that make sense? All right. So, verse 19, whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and teach men so, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, if somebody who doesn't understand what Jesus is saying, if they're blind, like the Pharisees, this would encourage them even more. They'd say, well, see, I'm not even going to give on the least of the little of the commandments. So, man, if somebody breaks one little rule, I'm going to be a zealous follower of Jesus and enforce it. Okay? That's not what he's talking about. Okay? It's not what he's talking about at all. For example, homosexuality. If I was to say, well, since Jesus forgives and sin, well, a homosexual can still be a Christian and doesn't necessarily need to repent and go through all this justification. Would that person be teaching men that the law of God is not important? Yes, obviously. Okay. But somebody going 75 on a 55 to save somebody's life, that's totally different. Okay. You're not teaching people to break the law. Verse 20, for I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now think about that. In no case enter the kingdom of heaven unless you're more righteous than the Pharisees. Now to a lot of people, this would seem very, very difficult because you got to remember, the Pharisees were looked upon by the people as righteous. People thought the Pharisees were righteous. They were respected in the community. They weren't, some hairy guy out in the wilderness like John the Baptist. That's who they were. Verse 21. You have heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. So Jesus now, what is he doing? He's taking a law And now he's going to teach. He's going to teach them how to apply the spirit of the law. He's taking a specific law here. Now check this out. But I say unto you, he's not changing the law. He just got done saying, I didn't change one jot or tittle of the law. What he's doing is he's teaching them how to render good judgment. All right? And also how to understand the Spirit. Here it is. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, or you fool, that's without hope. That's what that word means, a fool without hope of ever entering the kingdom, shall be in danger of the council. What council? The heavenly council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell fire. Now, what was the law? Now I want you guys to think about this. What was the law? Murder. What did Jesus he just expanded the law. Committing the actual murder is the only outward way you can be caught. But if you have inward thoughts of hatreds towards somebody, or you feel like that person, you're way better than that person, there's no way that person's ever going to entered in the kingdom of heaven, you violated the spirit of, what's the spirit of the law of murder? What is that law supposed to protect? It's supposed to protect you. The spirit of the law is that you don't hate other people for no reason, right? Now, I know the liberals got all these no hate signs, but what they're saying is don't hate paganism, love paganism. That's different. But the law against murder it goes further than that. That's just the letter of the law. The spirit of the law is you're first not supposed to hate somebody, because if you don't hate somebody, you're not going to commit the murder in the first place. Hatred is the fuel that leads to the murder. Okay? All right. So you guys kind of understand now, when God made all these laws, there were specific things he was trying to either protect or to promote. He's trying to promote love. Okay? Loving your neighbor. In fact, I can say this because Jesus said it. The entire law, the entire spirit of the law hangs on two major principles. Every law is designed around these two spiritual things. First greatest commandment is love God with all of your heart and all of your soul. All the laws of idolatry are there to prohibit you from from loving other gods more than God. Okay? All those other laws, but they can't do it by themselves, right? They can't do it. But just because I don't go out and worship a statue doesn't mean, because I've never been caught worshiping a statue or praying to a false god, that doesn't mean that I have faithfully always loved God with all my heart and all my soul. But some of those laws will help identify lawbreakers, but not all of them. Do you guys? I mean, this is a really cool study because you understand, instead of just looking at the law as, instead of just being shallow and looking at the letter of the law, like how is it actually worded, we need to look deeper and say, what is the purpose and the intent of this law? What was God trying to do? Was he trying to promote love? Was he trying to restrict hateful attitudes towards other people, jealousy, envy, and all these types of things? And then when you see a situation, or if you're in charge of something, you make the right call. Okay? All right. Now check this out, because even in heaven, there's a council. What is a council? It's a group of people, a group of angels, a group of people that had lived before, that you will go before. Think about this. People will be sitting in front of other angels, and it's not going to just be God at various times. There are councils in heaven where you go before people and talk to them and solve problems. Verse 23, Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar and go thy way. Now check this out. First, what's more important? First, be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. In other words, don't give your love offering or your peace offering first before you go and talk to your brother and tell him you're sorry. You guys see that? That's the spirit of the law there. Do the weightier matters first. Understand why specific laws are there and not just look at laws and find ways that you can outwardly obey and look righteous, or find loopholes where you can say somebody else broke something. Verse 25, agree with thine adversary quickly whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Okay, we're not going to go into that because that's not our topic today. But he says, verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. But this is what I want to get here. Another example of, Pastor Ben, what is the spirit of the law? What are you talking about here? Well, Jesus says this, you have heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. What commandment is that? Commandment number? Anybody know the commandment, kids? Adultery? 6 is murder. I think it's number 7, right? 7, you shall not commit adultery. All right. Jesus said, you've heard of that commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. That's what it says. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Okay? So somebody could say, hey, I was never caught in bed with another woman, so I'm innocent. But if somebody was at a bar, okay, and they were out there with their buddies or something, and it's a married man, and he starts Googling at some girl and telling her that he'd love to kiss her someday, that's adultery. That's adultery. All right? So the spirit of the law does what? It's not, God doesn't just put the law there because he that's the only thing he's trying to promote. He's trying to protect the sanctity of the marriage. Okay? The sanctity of the marriage. And looking at another woman with lust in your heart is already violating that sacred bond. Okay? That sacred bond. So I know a lot of people are looking at this thinking, man, we thought Moses' law was strict, the letter of the law, but what about the law of Christ? It's way deeper, okay? Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. Now we're going to go to one example here, and we're almost ready to wrap this up. So we can see the spirit of the law actually goes further than the letter of the law. You'd think it would be the other way. You'd think, oh, the letter, when I hear the letter of the law, that's somebody that doesn't want to show grace or mercy. They're just going to make sure that person gets the punishment. And we're not talking about grace or mercy in the study. The letter of the law is how the law was written. The spirit of the law is how that law really should be enforced. Okay? It's a big difference, big difference. It's the correct application of the law is what the spirit is. But verse 1 of Matthew chapter 12, now we're going to look at an application where Jesus, now check this out, where Jesus is going to violate the letter of the law. He's going to go 75 on a 55 to save somebody's life. Not literally, but you're going to see it right here. Verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. They're walking through a field. They're hungry. It's the Sabbath day, and they're eating. But when the Pharisees saw it, the rule followers, the letter of the law type of people, they said unto him, behold, thy disciples do that which is unlawful to do upon the Sabbath day. All right? And was it unlawful? By the letter, yes. But if you knew the intent of the law, you'd say, yeah, well, technically they were violating the law. Okay, they were eating on the Sabbath day. But what were they doing? They were going out to help people. They're going out to help people. So what's more important, helping people that are lost or working on the Sabbath? What should you do? What's the weightier matter of the law? Okay? So this is very interesting, you guys. You cannot simply study the Ten Commandments, which you should do. You cannot simply study the Ten Commandments and think that that's enough. That you will, that now if you just study those 10 commandments, that you're going to be in perfect obedience to those. Because there's going to be so many cases in your life where there's going to be gray areas. Areas where you're going to say, man, but I think it would be more important if I did this, but it does say not to do this. And whose help are you going to need? God's, the Holy Spirit. You're going to need the Holy Spirit with you to help you render good judgment. Because, man, the Pharisees looked righteous here. I mean, these guys were working on the Sabbath. Thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, have you not read what David did? What is Jesus going back to for you lawyers out there? Case study. There was a case. This has happened before. There was a time when somebody else violated the Sabbath in a similar way, and that was David. Now check this out. When he was an hungered, and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. Now, if you remember David, this was an extreme circumstance. Now I've heard it said before, and it's so true. There is an exception to every rule, okay? And this is one of them. David was on the run. He was God's anointed. He was chosen by God to be the next king of Israel, and Saul was trying to murder him. He was hungry, and he needed something to eat. The only food he could eat was the restricted bread in the temple that only the priests were allowed to eat. So would it have been righteous for the priests to deny David that bread and say, no, dude, priests only. I know you're starving to death and you're running away from this man to save your life, and you're the righteous anointed chosen by God, but too bad. Rules are rules, man. Think about that. There has to be an exception to the written rule or the written laws in certain cases. If there is with the word of God, Jesus is showing this. He's saying, hey, do you remember what David did? And it was unlawful. He didn't say it was lawful. It was unlawful for him to do that by the letter of the law. But he did not violate the spirit of law by eating that bread because he was on a righteous mission. Verse 5. Here's another case. Have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? How do the priests profane the Sabbath? What is the letter of the law? You shall not work on the Sabbath, right? What do the priests do on the Sabbath? Sacrifices. I mean, they're running like a butcher shop on the Sabbath day. That's a lot of work. I mean, they're cutting up animals, they're bleeding animals, they're processing them, they're putting them on the altar. Heavy, strenuous work for the priests. The priests violated the Sabbath law, but were blameless. Why were they blameless? Because they were also required to offer sacrifices. Why was David blameless? For eating the showbread. Because he was God's anointed and he was in the right. He was in the right in what he was doing. Okay? So, but somebody with a very narrow view like a Pharisee would say, Nope. The letter of the law is the letter of law. That is the law, and you violated it. And these are only two examples, my friends. There are other examples. Now, I'm not promoting leftist, lawless Christianity here. What I'm promoting is the correct application of the spirit of the law. Now, we can't take laws that we don't like, such as LGBTQ, and say, well, love overrides punishing them for their disgusting, filthy acts, okay? Because it doesn't. There is no love in that, okay? Number one, homosexuality is a direct affront to God and the family structure, and on the list goes. So this is where it does get difficult, because some would say, man, it's more difficult being a Christian than I had once thought. I can't just look at the letter of the law and say, okay, it's settled and done. You're going to have times where God's going to exercise your ability to discern, and again, use that word again, and use proper judgment. All right. But if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Do you guys see that? They were guilty by the letter of the law, but they were innocent in the eyes of God. And God said that you're condemning the innocent because you don't know what's more important when you're trying to apply the law. This is right from the Old Testament even, where he says, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. So God's whole sacrificial system in the first place was not more important than showing people mercy. Think about this for a minute. What was the purpose of... So remember, all the animals had to be slain. You had to sacrifice for sins and all that. Now, why did they have to sacrifice animals? So that they could receive what from God? Mercy. Forgiveness. Now, if they turn around and they're trying to set traps for people, and let's say the priests in the temple said, no, forget you, David. It's unlawful. You're not a priest. Don't touch that bread. Starve to death. Is that showing mercy? What is the weightier matter of the law? Mercy. Okay? Not sacrifice could be considered also religious rituals. Okay? And focusing more on the ritual than the spirit or the heart. All right. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So technically, now Jesus is getting a little technical with them. He's saying, nevertheless, the Son of Man, which is me, Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, he's the master of the Sabbath day in the first place. So why should the master be bound by his own... If he's above the Sabbath day, is he bound by any laws of the Sabbath? No way. And when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, now check this out, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? Why did they ask him this? That they might accuse him. Now, what did I say in the beginning of this study? There are a lot of people who understand the letter of the law, and they love to study it for, unfortunately, two purposes. To bring glory to themselves, or to use the letter of the law to entrap other people. And the Pharisees they're doing just that. They're trying to entrap Jesus by the letter of the law. And he said unto them, what man shall there be among you? Now this is really awesome, because what did Jesus do to the rule followers? He'd point out a specific case or a situation and say, hey, dude, are you going to use a little common sense here? This is common sense. What's more important? All right. And he said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep? And if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? Okay. So if it's the Sabbath day and your sheep fell into the ditch, do you look at the sheep and say, I'll come get you in 24 hours. Hopefully you're alive by then. I mean, what kind of a lawmaker, think about this, what kind of lawmaker would God be if that's what he wanted us to do? Okay? Think about that. There are people in corporations and in businesses and in youth sports that make rules like this without any consideration for, or at least the people that are trying to enforce them or trying to make the judgment call, they're not taking into consideration the circumstance and having compassion, having love, having an understanding heart of the matter. Okay? And that's really what we need everywhere around our country today is people in these positions to not be so nitpicky, to not be straining at gnats and swallowing camels. Do you remember back during the COVID times? And there's probably still come back again, who knows? If you weren't wearing a mask, who were the greatest rule followers? The liberals, right? The leftists, those people that don't worship God, don't trust in God. They were all walking around feeling like they were righteous because they had the symbol of obedience on by the letter of the law. And yet, the ridiculousness of that, everybody knows that it wasn't helping anybody anyways. And we could go on and on. But that they're just an example of somebody who's just going to follow a rule to look righteous. And then saith he to the man, stretch forth thine hand, and he stretched it forth, and he restored it whole, like as the other. So and they asked him if it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath day. What does Jesus do? He just shoves it right into the Pharisee's face and heals that guy. All right. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Think about that. Why did the Pharisees want to destroy Jesus? Because he broke the letter of the law. And they were so stupid and so shallow and so narrow in their thinking that they didn't understand it was more righteous to save the lost or to heal somebody than to worry about not working on the Sabbath day. Now, the Sabbath day, what is the purpose of the Sabbath day? One of the things that's supposed to restrict you from doing is what? To stop you from having this never-ending cycle of greed or incessant need of, I got to get something done. I got to work. Okay. It's supposed to stop us from that cycle. So in other words, it was meant for people to say, if it was a big business owner, man, I know, I've only made $1 million this year, but if I could stay open on Sundays, I could make $1 million more. That's the purpose of the Sabbath. That's why this says you shall not work on the Sabbath, so that people aren't being greedy and other things. All right, so in closing, before we go to questions and comments, again, I would encourage everybody. Like I said, I brought up my son's youth sport incident. That's just an example of how ridiculous the letter of the law can be if you don't have people using good judgment. And we as Christians, we need to really take these teachings serious. We do not want to be Pharisees. We do not want to be these people who are blind and have tunnel vision when they say, well, that is the rule, that is the policy, and even carry that forth into more important biblical principles. We've got to understand what's more important: mercy, love, Jesus, the importance of marriage. He's talking about, the two major cases that he brought up was adultery and murder. Okay? Because a lot of people, I guess those are easy ones to pick out, because a lot of people don't commit adultery by sleeping with another person, but they do all the other things that would be classified as it. And a lot of people don't murder, but they're just as guilty as a murderer in their heart. And on, the list could go. So, important study. I hope everybody can think about that and really, really pray about it and ask for wisdom and understanding as they study the scriptures. We will be right back for questions and comments. Be sure to join us live every Thursday morning, 9:30 a.m. for prophecy updates and Sunday mornings, 10:30 a.m. for our line-by-line Bible studies. If you live near Princeton, Minnesota, and would like to join us in person for our Sunday morning church services, please email me at ben@christianovercomers.com for details and directions. Also, be sure to visit our website at christianovercomers.com to sign up for our weekly email updates, find our latest prophecy updates on video or podcast, catch up with our line-by-line studies, also available on video or audio podcast. And we even archive all of our studies by date. So if you have a phone or a tablet, bookmark this page so you can play our studies on the go while you're driving, going for a run, or doing chores. Now to our questions and comments. All right. Welcome back. We'll take questions and comments.
Well, first of all, I think the main word there is common sense. I don't know how many times I've said, where's the common sense in so many things, especially nowadays. And then mercy. I'd also believe in mercy. Like, even if you did violate both the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, I think sometimes I don't know if deserve is the right word, but should be given mercy sometimes. Maybe if it's your first violation of something, or I think that ties in as well. But the one thing that I struggle with a little bit about what about laws that violate my rights or my values and beliefs. Because obviously there are some, and we are supposed to obey the law and follow the rules of our lawmakers and all that. But say like gun laws, if they are banning guns, and then they come knock on my door and say, "Where are your guns?" I'm not going to tell them where my guns are. I'm going to say I don't have any, or I lost them, or they fell in the bottom of a lake, or and so I'm violating the law. I could get in trouble for that. Things like the vaccine mandates. If you have to have a vaccine to work at a certain place or go to a certain place, and you maybe come up with a fake vaccine card to get around it, because it's violating my rights, or abortion laws. That it's the law. You in some states that you can legally kill babies inside the mother's womb, but I don't know. Just what do you think on how to handle those? Is it wrong to lie or to get around these laws that I clearly believe are violating my rights and my values?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, first off, number one, God's law is what we need to obey first and foremost. Now, we know man's laws, oftentimes, like you were saying, attempt to cause us to violate God's law. But I think that's another thing where it's like we really have to see the situation, because there are so many other circumstances around something, like if they were to come, like, try to round up our guns and things like that, what else is going on in the country? And just trying to weigh all of that out. It's interesting that scales are used for justice, because there is a weighing things out. What would I do if we don't want to give up our guns no matter what, right? But I don't know. It would depend on where the scales are at that time, and how I would make that decision. Oh, and another thing is, sometimes, like Jesus said in a couple different places, that we are to be wiser, or be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So I think our first approach is to be smarter than the enemy if we can, and would use the letter of the law if we can to our advantage, if we're still trying to obey the spirit of God's law. But in another case, if you're at an out and out, if you're in a war, you try to deceive your enemy. For example, if somebody makes war upon my house, comes in and unexpectedly breaks through my door, puts a gun to my head, and says, "Where are your children?" And I know they're out in my backyard or in the woods somewhere, and they're not going to be home for an hour. And if I told, should I tell that guy, oh yeah, my kids, they went into the backwoods there. They should be back in about an hour. Would it be lying for me or harmful? Would it be a harmful lie for me to say they're out of state today? They're not going to be home for a week.
Right.
I mean, that's just a simple example. It's always more difficult when you get into real examples, but I guess I'm just trying to point out that I think it's okay in certain circumstances to lie to protect life or to protect somebody else's property, or you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a feeling those situations are going to be coming up more and more, especially when it comes to like homosexuality things. There's another case on front of the Supreme Court that was similar to the baker or the photographer, whether or not you need to, give service to these people if they violate your religious beliefs. But
Well, there's a biblical example that just popped in my mind. Jael in the book of Judges. There was one of the enemy armies was coming against Israel, and the king of that army was traveling through Jael's, where she was. I think she was a shepherd and was in a tent. And he came up to her tent, and she offered him buttermilk and food, and said, "Hey, just rest here. Make sure I'll take care of you. I'll feed you. And how is you?" And as soon as he fell asleep, she took a tent peg and hit him right in the head with it and killed him. So she deceived him, killed him, but yet she was a hero of God's people in the book of Judges. So I guess that would be, somebody would say, well, you can never tell a lie no matter what. I mean, Jael lied to that guy.
Right.
I mean, that was horrible. But she lied with a good intention. She lied to preserve and protect her nation, her people.
yeah, and again, I think that's where discretion comes in, with wisdom and God's wisdom. Because like police officers are told that they can use their discretion. It's called officer discretion. You don't have to give somebody a ticket just because they violated the law. It's up to
Right.
you. When you look at the totality, all of the circumstances.
Yeah.
Involved.
Is it a family guy that's only done it one time and all
Yeah,
this, or is it
right.
some? But that was the thing is, so you were in law enforcement how many years ago?
I don't know, about 15.
So from what I've been reading more and more, and I think we see it now with with people having cell phones and everything, they're taking away that discretion from more and more discretion away from the officers on the
Yeah.
ground, and making them adhere to the cold dead policies in order to protect everybody, supposedly protect them. But then everybody ends up losing because you don't have people showing mercy. Sometimes a police officer can, like, you could say it better than I mean, you could say it better than I could. You would be in a situation where you could just tell that person needs mercy
Right.
more than the letter of the law thrown at them at that moment.
Yeah, even though they violated both the letter and the
Yeah.
spirit. Yeah, exactly.
Versus somebody who you know is an absolute manipulator, an evil person. You're like, that person needs to be prosecuted to the fullest
Yeah.
extent of the law, because if I let him go, he's just going to go out and harm somebody else. This is bad,
But the problem is then you do get a certain amount of police officers that really enjoy that power and can definitely abuse it. There are definitely police out there that abuse that power because
Yeah.
you do basically become almost like a god. You decide the fate of people, right there on the spot, or so it is something they got to keep in check. Certain people are more apt to be use that power
Yeah.
in a
And
negative way.
that's where Jesus said that, the greatest among you shall be as the servant. So obviously not everybody's doing that, but a good Christian police officer would be going in there thinking as a servant's heart, how am I going to help these people's lives rather than hurt them?
Right.
Type of a thing.
Hand of Seeds says a couple things here. Do those who live for Christ get more unfair judgments under the law due to principalities using the unlearned to aggravate?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. That's where, the whole I've got to be careful with my verbiage because I get flagged, but the whole plague thing that had happened. And there are still people trying to, in various places of employment, still trying to exercise the letter of the law against people who don't want to follow all these extra requirements because they feel they violate their rights as a Christian, number one, or their beliefs as a Christian, and number two, just violating their rights as a person. Yeah, it's definitely I think they're causing situations and making laws, making rules to put the pressure on Christians to
Right.
conform to the world.
Like hate speech laws.
Yep. Hate speech.
That's how they're going to end up getting us. Is if you say anything about a gay person negative, you say it's wrong or they're sinning or they
Yep.
that's hate speech, and you'll be in trouble. But not yet in this country, I guess. But it's coming.
Well, by public opinion, it definitely is already
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I mean,
Right.
everybody will start just shaming you or looking at you sideways for
Canceled.
Yeah.
In an age that the angels who followed Satan, who at the time was in a certain way their leader, those angels broke the law but followed the spirit of the law by following their king, which at that time they would have been loyal to their king, who was Satan. Am I seeing this wrong? Question mark.
Okay, so I'm assuming he's referring to the angels that left their place of habitation that Jude talks about, as well as Second Peter. He's saying they followed the spirit of the law.
Well, both, I think, but because they were following their leader.
Well, I mean, yeah, whatever position Satan was in at that time, even if he was their king or their direct leader, there has always been God over and above him. And if that leader is disobeying God, then they have to disobey the leader to obey God.
And then they, so go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, they just continue with like the parallel of in the military, if a squad leader or Satan tells a fire team leader, the angels, something that they should do, and they don't go and ask the platoon leader, God. So that same concept is, do you follow an order because you're supposed to follow the order?
Yeah, I think, well, even in the military, we, when we first got in and through our, before basic training or during basic training, we had these meetings where they specifically told us you can't obey an unlawful order. It is your duty. If your commander tells you to go kill this guy, let's say it's a prisoner of war. If your commander tells you to go kill him, you have to not only disobey that order, but you're obligated to report that incident. So no matter what, you have to do the right thing. I mean, well, going back to the Bible, in the Army, we were told, I don't know what the Army's like anymore, but you had to do you were responsible for doing the right thing no matter what. You couldn't use an excuse that my squad leader told me to do this or my commander. That wasn't an acceptable excuse.
I imagine there could be gray areas, though, where they
Yeah.
are giving you a lawful command, and you might not see the whole picture and think, that's not right, I'm not going to do that. Then, there is a gray area there where maybe you should have obeyed the command, but you didn't know the whole picture, so I don't know, that can be some touchy.
And for those that want to do what's right, the toughest part about our lives, I think, are those gray areas.
Yeah.
And I think that's all about you read the book of Proverbs, and you read Jesus's teachings, that's where wisdom comes into play. That's why we're supposed to seek wisdom like gold, like more than fine gold. It's not just, memorizing the Bible is great, but you have to know. You can't just know the Bible. You have to know how to apply it in a given situation, and that's what wisdom does for us. And I think that's just something we have to keep striving for, is wisdom on how to handle different situations. Like I was telling you off air, it's like I think we want to have a matter settled and done in our mind, and just say, okay, I've got that case closed. I know what to do all the time for that situation. But it just isn't that easy. Like I said, it's almost laziness on our part, or just wanting to, not have these difficult decisions to make at different times. You want it to be in a nice package and be on our way. But we're never going to have those nice packages.
Right.
I think the more wisdom we have, the more right decisions we'll make. But it's still going to be a challenge.
And I think if you have the Holy Spirit indwelling in you, I think that is what, I guess feeds that wisdom. I think you get a sense, almost like a spider sense of this doesn't seem right, or this does seem right. But I think the Holy Spirit is an integral part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gray area decision making.
Right. And that's why, we often pray, Lord, help, show me the way. What should I do in this circumstance? Your law says this, but this is what's going on. How do I obey it? And I know for me, it's a constant thing where I'm trying to figure out what I should be doing. And I figure if I know what I'm doing, then I'm going to be 100% zealous. I don't feel like I have a problem of being 100% zealous and motivated to do what I know I'm supposed to do. Obviously, I'm a sinful person too. I'm not trying to say but when you feel like there isn't a gray area, it's easier to go gung ho on it. And I think going back to the Pharisees, they didn't understand there were these gray areas, or areas where wisdom was needed. And they were just so dense that they were zealous, but very dense. They were knowledgeable. They knew the letter of the law. They had studied all these things, but nobody ever taught them to look deeper into why these laws are made, why they're supposed to do them, and how they should be applied. They were like, I don't know. A lot of people see somebody and they say, hey, that person's really book smart, but they have absolutely no common sense. And I think that's, in a sense, that fits me. I think that probably fit many of the Pharisees back in the day. And the one thing they weren't that was good, was a good quality anyways, is they weren't lukewarm. They weren't moderates. They were zealous at what they did. They were just dense. Jesus called them blind guides. Did you have something you wanted to add? No? Anything else over there? No? All right. Well, I guess we'll close it up, and we will see you next time. Until then, stay in His Word every single day so that you can be a Christian overcomer. God bless.
Christian Overcomers is brought to you by the tithes and offerings of our listeners. If you would like to support our ministry, please go to ChristianOvercomers.com. God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of His terrible sword. His truth is marching on.